Cop eats with homeless woman daily, then, a shocking twist. Each afternoon, Officer Daniel sat on the same park bench, unwrapping his lunch beside a woman named Marie, a quiet but kind-hearted soul who had been living on the streets for years. What started as a simple act of sharing a meal turned into an unspoken ritual, a silent companionship that grew stronger with time. Marie rarely spoke about her past, and Officer Daniels never pried. Instead, they found comfort in the simple moments, sharing stories, exchanging smiles, and enjoying the warmth of a familiar presence. But one fateful afternoon, as they settled into their usual routine, something happened that neither of them could have predicted. A revelation so profound that it would not only change their lives forever, but leave the entire community stunned. What unfolded next was nothing short of extraordinary. But before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more heartwarming and inspiring tales that will leave you speechless. And don't forget to hit the bell icon, because you never know when the next story might change the way you see the world. Demanding, filled with the weight of responsibility that came with wearing the badge. Yet, no matter how chaotic his shift was, there was one moment of peace he never missed, a quiet lunch on the same park bench where he found solace in an unlikely friendship. Each afternoon, he sat down with Eleanor, a homeless woman whose life had taken a series of cruel turns. At first, their interactions were limited to polite nods and simple greetings. But over time, as Smith continued to share his lunch, their bond deepened. Eleanor, with her weathered hands and wise eyes, began to open up, sharing fragments of her past, memories of a time when she too had a home, a family, and dreams she had once chased. For Smith, these moments were a reminder that every person had a story, and that kindness had the power to restore dignity where the world had stripped it away. He never saw Eleanor as just another person on the streets. He saw her as someone who mattered. But one fateful afternoon, as they settled into their usual routine, something unexpected happened. Eleanor handed Smith an old, tattered envelope with trembling hands. "You need to see this," she said softly, her voice laced with something between fear and hope. What Smith discovered inside would not only shake him to his core, but send ripples through your community. A revelation so shocking, so life-changing, that it would challenge everything he thought he knew about fate, compassion, and second chances. Before we dive into this incredible turn of events, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more heartwarming and inspiring stories that might just change your perspective. And don't forget to hit the bell icon, because sometimes the most unexpected moments can transform lives in ways we never imagined. Now let's get started. On the same worn-out bench, her gaze fixed on something distant as if lost in a world of memories. She was frail but carried herself with quiet dignity, her tattered coat wrapped tightly around her, as though it shielded more than just the cold. At first, Smith simply observed, offering a polite nod as he passed by. But as the days stretched into weeks, he couldn't ignore the pull of curiosity and concern. One afternoon, he decided to approach her. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said gently, holding out a wrapped sandwich from his lunch. "Hope you don't mind some company." The woman hesitated but eventually accepted the meal with a small, appreciative smile. "Name's Eleanor," she murmured. From that day on, their quiet lunches became a ritual. Smith would bring an extra sandwich, and Eleanor would offer stories in return, fragments of a life once filled with laughter, love, and heartbreak. She had been a mother, a wife, and once a woman with big dreams. But life had taken its toll, leaving her alone with nothing but memories and the kindness of strangers. For Smith, their daily meetings were more than just an act of charity. They were a reminder of why he chose to serve, not just to enforce the law, but to see the humanity in every person, regardless of their circumstances. Then, one day, Eleanor wasn't on the bench. Smith's stomach tightened. Days passed, and worry gnawed at him until finally he spotted her again, But something was different. With trembling hands, she handed him a crumpled letter, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "You need to read this," she whispered. What Smith discovered inside would not only rewrite Eleanor's fate, but send shockwaves through his own life in ways he never imagined. Before we dive into this extraordinary revelation, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more stories that will touch your heart and challenge your perspective. And don't forget to hit the bell icon, because sometimes the smallest acts of kindness lead to the most life-changing moments. Now let's get started. First, their interactions were little more than pleasantries, a passing good afternoon or a simple nod of acknowledgement. But as time went on, something about Amy Jo's quiet resilience drew Smith in. Unlike many he encountered on the streets, she never asked for anything. She never held a sign or extended a hand for spare change. Instead, she simply sat, observing the world with a peaceful yet distant expression, as if lost in the echoes of a life she once knew. One afternoon, Smith decided to sit beside her. He handed her an extra sandwich he had packed, expecting her to take it without hesitation. But instead, Amy Jo hesitated, looking almost embarrassed. "I appreciate it," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, "but I think someone else might need it more." Her words struck him. Here was a woman who had so little, yet she was still thinking of others before herself. That moment turned a passing acquaintance into something deeper. Every day after that, Smith made sure to bring an extra lunch, not just to offer her food, but to sit and talk. He learned bits and pieces of her story, though she was careful not to reveal too much. Amy Jo had once been just like anyone else, with a home, a job, and dreams. But life had taken unexpected turns, leading her to this bench in the park, where she found herself unseen by most, except for Smith. Then, one day, she wasn't there. Smith felt an uneasy pit in his stomach. Had something happened to her? Days passed, and worry gnawed at him until, finally, he spotted her again. But this time there was something different. Something in her eyes, in the way she clutched a worn piece of paper in her hands. "You need to see this," she said, her voice unsteady. What Smith discovered next would shake him to his core, revealing a truth that would change both their lives forever. Before we dive into this incredible twist, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more stories that inspire and uplift. And make sure to hit the bell icon, because sometimes the most unexpected moments hold the power to change everything. Now, let's begin. Smith lowered himself onto the bench. He let out a slow breath, allowing the tension of the day to momentarily ease. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't just a policeman patrolling the streets. He was simply a man in need of a quiet moment. Amy Jo sat beside him, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She didn't press him for conversation, nor did she ask any questions. Instead, she simply let the silence settle between them, a silence that felt oddly comforting. After a moment, Smith reached into his bag and pulled out an extra sandwich. "I brought an extra today," he said, offering it to her. Amy Jo glanced at it but hesitated before taking it. "Thank you," she murmured, her eyes filled with something deeper than gratitude. They sat there, sharing a quiet meal, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the park. It became their routine, a simple yet meaningful exchange of food, conversation, and unspoken understanding. Over time, Smith learned little pieces of her life. She had once had a home, a family, and a job she loved. But life had been cruel, and through a series of misfortunes, she found herself without a place to go. Yet despite everything, she never let bitterness take hold of her. She still smiled, still believed in kindness, and still carried a quiet strength that Smith deeply admired. Then, one day, she wasn't there. Smith's heart sank as he scanned the park, but there was no sign of her. Days passed and worry gnawed at him, until finally he saw her again. But something was different this time. She was holding a worn, crumpled envelope, her hands trembling as she clutched it tightly. "You need to see this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. What Smith read inside would shake him to his core, setting off a chain of events that would change both of their lives forever. Before we uncover the shocking truth, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more stories that inspire and move the heart. And make sure to hit the bell icon, because sometimes the smallest moments lead to the most unexpected journeys. Now let's dive in. Could turn around for me, she said softly, running her fingers over the worn pages. Maybe I could get a job again, find a way to rebuild. Smith felt a lump form in his throat. He had met many people in difficult situations, but there was something about Amy Jo's quiet determination that struck him deeply. She wasn't asking for a handout, just a chance, a way to regain the dignity life had stripped away from her. He leaned forward. "You know, I could help," he offered. "If you'd like." Amy Jo's eyes widened. "You'd do that?" "Of course," Smith said with a nod. "We'll take it slow, one step at a time." And so, their lunch meetings became more than just shared meals. They became lessons in hope, patience, and perseverance. Each afternoon, Smith would bring a sandwich and a book, guiding Amy Jo through the words, helping her sound them out, and celebrating every small victory. At first it was slow going. Some words frustrated her, and there were days she doubted herself. But Smith never let her give up. "One word at a time," he'd remind her. "You're getting better every day." And she was. Weeks turned into months, and with each passing day, Amy Jo's confidence grew. She started reading short sentences, then paragraphs, until one afternoon she picked up a book and read aloud without hesitation. It was a simple passage, but it meant everything. Tears welled in her eyes as she looked up at Smith. "I never thought I'd get this far," she whispered. "You did this, Amy Jo," Smith said proudly. "I just gave you the tools." It should have been a moment of pure joy, but something in Amy Jo's expression shifted. She hesitated, then reached into her coat pocket, pulling out a crumpled envelope. "I got this a few days ago," she said, her voice trembling. "I couldn't read it before, but now I can." She handed it to Smith, her hands shaking. "And you need to see what it says." What Smith read inside would change everything, for Amy Jo, for himself, and for the community that had unknowingly turned its back on her. Before we reveal the shocking truth, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more inspiring stories that remind us of the power of kindness and second chances. And be sure to hit the bell icon, because sometimes the smallest acts of compassion lead to the most life-changing moments. Now, let's dive in. Plan. Teaching her to read was just the beginning. Amy Jo needed a real chance to get back on her feet. Smith reached out to local shelters, connected her with job assistance programs, and even rallied the community to support her. Slowly, piece by piece, Amy Jo's life began to change. Their lessons continued, but now they weren't just about reading, they were about hope, about reclaiming a life once lost. And every time she read a new sentence, every time she took a step forward, that quiet spark in her eyes burned a little brighter. Then one day, she handed Smith a letter, her hands trembling. "I read it," she whispered, "and it changes everything." Before we reveal the incredible twist, small apartment for Amy Jo, along with essentials to help her start anew. More than just a roof over her head, it was a symbol of a fresh start, a chance to rebuild the life she had once lost. When Smith handed her the keys, Amy Jo clutched them tightly, tears welling in her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. "You already have," Smith replied, "by never giving up." But just as everything seemed to be falling into place, Amy Jo received a letter, one that would change everything. With trembling hands she read it, her breath catching in her throat. "You need to see this," she told Smith, her voice shaking. What happened next would leave both of them stunned. proving that kindness has a way of coming full circle. Before we reveal the incredible twist, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories that remind us of the power of hope and human connection. And hit the bell icon, because sometimes the smallest acts of compassion lead to the most unexpected miracles. Now, let's dive in," said, her voice filled with emotion as she ran her fingers over the book-lined shelves. "I used to struggle just to read a single word, and now I'm surrounded by them." Smith smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "You earned this, Amy Jo. This is just the beginning." With a steady job, a home, and a renewed sense of purpose, Amy Jo's life had transformed in ways she once thought impossible. But just when she believed the surprises were over, another twist awaited her. One afternoon, she received a letter, one that would change everything once again. As she read the words, her hands trembled, her breath hitched. Then, without hesitation, she rushed to find Smith. "You need to see this," she whispered, holding out the letter. What happened next would leave them both speechless, proving that a single act of kindness can ripple further than anyone ever imagined. Before we reveal the astonishing turn of events, make sure to subscribe for more inspiring stories that remind us of the power of second chances. And don't forget to hit the bell icon, because sometimes the smallest gestures lead to the biggest miracles. Now let's dive in. Started with a simple meal shared on a park bench and a kind-hearted officer who saw more than just a struggling woman. She didn't just rebuild her life, she became an advocate for others facing similar hardships. Amy Jo began volunteering at shelters, helping others learn to read, just as Smith had helped her. One afternoon, as she was organizing books at the library, a familiar voice caught her attention. "You're a hard woman to track down," Smith said with a grin. Amy Jo turned, her eyes shining. "You found me." "I had to," he said, holding up an envelope, "because you need to see this." She took it, her hands trembling, and as she read the words inside, her breath caught. The past, the struggle, the journey, it had all led to this moment. What happened next would prove that kindness never stops at just one person. It spreads, changing lives in ways no one could ever predict. Before we reveal the final, incredible twist, don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us of the power of resilience and compassion. And hit the bell icon, because sometimes a single act of kindness can come full circle in the most unbelievable way. Now, let's dive in. Incredible stories that celebrate kindness, resilience, and the power of human connection. And don't forget to hit the bell icon so you never miss a story that could brighten your day or change your perspective. A man's journey is proof that small acts of kindness can lead to life-changing transformations. And who knows, the next act of compassion could start with you. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.